Live. Okay, this is Baltimore City Budget and Appropriations Committee. We're going to get started. We are here for, folks, can you grab your seats, please?
Put an email. Okay.
I went in. That's perfect. Color's good. We are here for the proposed operating budget for 2018-2019 fiscal year for Baltimore City Public School System. I'm Eric Costello from the 11th District, Chair of the committee. I'm joined to my left by Councilman Leon Pinkett from the 7th District, Vice Chair of the committee. Zeke Cohen from the 1st District, Mary Pat Clark from the 14th District, Councilwoman Shannon Sneed from the 13th District, member of the committee, Councilman Ryan Dorsey from the 3rd, Councilman Brandon Scott from the 2nd District, member of the committee. To my right, Vice President of the City Council, Sharon Green Middleton from the 6th District, member of the committee, Councilman Robert Stokes from the 12th District, Councilman Isaac Yitzi Schleifer from the 5th District, member of the committee, Councilman Bill Henry from the 4th District, member of the committee. To my immediate right is Marguerite Curran, staff to the committee, also joined by Rebecca Tabb, who is General Counsel to the City Council. We have Bob Seneme from the Bureau of Budget and Management Research. Thank you. And Karan Banks representing Mayor Catherine Pugh. What we are going to do, Dr. Santelisa's, we are going to, I understand you have a presentation, and Chairwoman Kagan, you're here as well. So we're going to start with the chair. I would like for you to introduce your colleagues on the board. If you have any introductory remarks, and then please turn it over to Dr. Santelisa's. Thank you for being here with us. We understand and appreciate how busy you are. Dr. Santelisa's, if you could follow up by introducing everyone from your administrative team that's here tonight with us. And then I'll leave it to you whether it's going to be you or Mr. Walker who's going to be presenting. We have a pretty lengthy presentation. I'm going to ask that we keep this presentation to about 15 minutes or less. Most of our colleagues are familiar with what it is that you all do on a day-to-day basis and have a pretty good idea of what our questions and concerns are. So with that, I'll turn it over to you, Madam Chairwoman. If you're testifying, please make sure you speak into the mic. This is being recorded on YouTube. This is on Channel 25 on Comcast, on Charm TV, and is being streamed live. So, Madam Chairwoman.
Okay, this is clearly not a setup designed for me.
And please state your name. And
I will. Thank you, Chairman Costello, Vice Chairman Pinkett, other members of the Budget and Appropriations Committee, and nice to see so many members of the City Council here. I am Cheryl Kashani. I'm the chair of the Baltimore City Board of School Commissioners. I have the privilege of working with 8 other very dedicated individuals on the school board. And with me today to represent the board are Commissioners Andy Frank, and Johnette Richardson. Thank you. Also with me, as you know, is Dr. Santelisa's, Interim Chief Financial Officer John Walker, and Chief of Staff, is Allison here? Allison will be joining us, and members of the cabinet, which Dr. Santelisa's will introduce. Before we begin the presentation, I want to thank the City Council and the Mayor and state elected officials for all your efforts to help with financial situations as they've come up. This has been a steadier year for the city. The school system, we haven't had any crises this year, but that's in large part due to all the work we all did together last year. So can't say often enough how much we've appreciated that work together. I also want to note that the City Council's partnership with the schools is important to us. We all have the same goal, and that's to do everything we can to support the success of our kids and our students. I personally have appreciated and benefited the opportunities to engage with the council as a whole. You've come up to North Avenue, we brief you, we talk about various things. But I've also had the opportunity to interact with you on one-on-one, and I appreciate that as well. I look forward to even stronger partnership going forward, because I think as we engage in different issues, there's always room for some strengthening of that partnership, and I'm personally committed to investing in that as we move forward. We anticipate that this will be the last budget prior to the Kirwan Commission's recommendations to the General Assembly regarding the need for additional funding for school districts like Baltimore City who have a high needs population. We hope and we anticipate that the Kirwan Commission and the General Assembly will ultimately provide a direction for funding that adequately addresses our needs. That remains to be seen, but that's our hope at this point. With that said, with your permission, I'd like to invite Dr. Santelises to begin the presentation.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Good evening, Councilman Costello and the entire City Council. It's good to be here this evening. I want to thank not only our board chair, Cheryl Kashani, who is here this evening, but also to thank Commissioners Frank and Commissioner Richardson, who are here for coming. I also want to, before we begin, really thank all of you for your participation in the moment of silence we had yesterday for the Day of Remembrance and Peace with regards to the young people that our school system has lost, and our city, frankly, has lost this year. It meant a great deal, and really want to thank you all for, even as you conducted business in what some would deem your peak season of hearings, that you took the time to participate with us. And so I just want to thank all of you, and particularly Councilman Costello, who made sure that you all were in sync with where we are. So thank you for your leadership as well on that. I also want to make sure that as we begin this evening, and I will try to go fast, and I will look for the signal from the committee chair to make sure that I am going at rapid pace. I think that one of the things that I am pleased with, I know that there was an initial preliminary hearing a few weeks back, but one of the things that I am most excited about is the fact that because of the work that the City Council did, that the mayor, that our state delegation, and frankly, the parents, citizens, and young people of Baltimore City did during the 16-17 school year, we were able to achieve the stability that we had always believed we would be able to achieve with the additional funding. So I want to thank you all again for that, and just point out that this budget acknowledges what we said at that time we needed to really overcome the $130 million gap. So when we take a look back to where we were when we were talking about layoffs, my gosh, it seems like almost a decade ago that we were talking about the possibility of staff reductions. One of the things that I just want to note, that while reductions were focused in the district office in FY18, for the first time, schools were also substantially impacted. And that as city schools student enrollment has decreased, the number of funded employee positions has actually decreased at a somewhat slightly faster pace. This is also significant because of the work that we have committed to do along with the City Council, along with the mayor, and other organizations to increase enrollment, because in the end, what will bring more funding most rapidly to city schools is increasing enrollment. So for the first time, that's promoting growth. And again, this is just a reminder of some of the key focus areas for the system with regards to our efforts around promoting enrollment growth. Many of you know these already, but we thought that it was important to stress, one, that we are continuing with an approach to school growth that includes a portfolio of high-quality options for families in Baltimore City. We know that not all of the options currently are high options, and we are high quality, and we are working on that, but we do know that families in Baltimore City continue to want choice and variety as long as it is high-quality variety. Second, and this is something that, again, the City Council should really see as the bearing out of the fruit of their work. Our 21st century buildings are opening, have opened, and we're seeing already the difference in the landscape that occurs when we have 21st century buildings as well as investments in teaching and learning.
Dr. Santelisa's, just take a pause for a minute. We've been joined by City Council President Bernard C. Jack Young. We've also been joined by Councilwoman Mary Pat Clark from the 14th District, and I believe Councilman John Bullock from the 9th District has joined us. We have your Chief of Staff, Allison Perkins-Cohen, who just joined us. Karen Stokes, who is Director of the Mayor's Office of Government Relations, representing Mayor Pugh, as well as Poetry Deal from her office has joined us. And we have Michael Huber, Director of Economic Development for Council President Young, as well as Council President Young's Director of Legislative Affairs, Kara Kuntz, and I believe that's everyone. Please continue. I apologize for interrupting.
No, and I actually thank you for the reminder. If it's all right, I'd like to also note, which you asked me to do, but I was remiss. I'd like to also make mention of the City Schools team, my team, that is here also to support with responding to City Council's questions. So with us we have Mary Ann Cox, who is the Deputy Chief Financial Officer.
Please stand or just raise your hand just so we know who stand, actually, please, just for a second, just so we can all see you. Thank you very much.
We have Dr. Lynette Washington, who is our acting Chief Operating Officer in the absence of Keith Scroggins, who is on extended leave right now, and she's been doing a fantastic job. We have Jeremy Grant Skinner, who is our Chief Human Capital, i.e. Human Resources, if you can't remember what that one is. Then we also have Melissa Broom, who is our Director of Legislative Affairs, and we have Dewana Storette, who works in collaboration, is also the Director of Legislative Relations with the board. And then here, you heard from Board Chair Kashani. We have Allison Perkins-Cohen, who is the Chief of Staff, and we have John Walker, our Chief Financial Officer. So that's who we have with us this evening for staff.
And I just want to apologize to the chair. I said a constituent's name who I'm good friends with and said her last name instead of yours. It's been a long day, so I apologize, Chair Kashani.
And so where I left off, and I'll just highlight quickly, is that in addition to our portfolio of high-quality school options in 21st century buildings, we really are continuing to build on the strength of our early learning programs. One of the things that we have found, even in increasing enrollment, that one of our biggest target areas where we have the greatest opportunity for increased growth is in our early learning programs, making those more available and getting the word out. So we are focused on continuing to build high-quality early learning programs. And then that final bullet, I think, can be summed up to customer service and really timely, courteous, and effective service of families and staff. What we found is that when families actually have positive interactions with city schools, they actually do want to come and do want to stay, which really should be no surprise to any of us. So I wanted to briefly take some time to run back through our district-wide priority of our blueprint for success, because I do know that there were some questions in preliminary hearings. I know that there will be others this evening. So I just wanted to put us all in remembrance of the fact that the blueprint really grew out of close to a half a year of listening to students, to community members, to teachers, to examining data, principals, and I will say say that now, a year and a half later, the blueprint for success still resonates with just about everyone that I have the chance to speak with about it, who knows about it. If anything else, the demand in that year and a half has increased for more opportunities to provide input. And so the blueprint for success is really based on the belief that is borne out in the organizational literature and research, which is that we really can't get good at, as human beings, at 6 or 7 or 10 things at once, but a small set of key practices and focus areas really is our way of leveraging more rapid and deep change and improvement in city schools. And so, by way of reminder, our 3 areas, as you see here, are student wholeness, which really is the anchor for all the other areas. Literacy, because literacy is frankly the backbone of all other academic and frankly career attainment. And then leadership, because if we don't actually invest in building up the competency, the skill base of those who serve young people directly and central support for those who serve young people directly, then our progress towards improvement will in fact flatline. Now, with regards to implementation strategy, just again by way of framing, so that when we get into the budget questions, I want to remind the City Council that our implementation strategy, which we have communicated, which we are operating, I just left before coming here, a launch and a meeting for some of our intensive learning sites in restorative practices, which you'll see, really is indicative of a 2-pronged strategy. And that is, within these 3 areas, identifying training and initiatives that will cut across all schools, but at the same time realizing, and we heard loud and clear from folks on the ground, that they needed and want Baltimore City school examples of deep practice. And so in order to feed those examples of excellence, we identified, beginning of this school year, what we're calling intensive learning sites based on schools, reviewing the criteria, and frankly self-identifying. So the great part about these intensive learning sites is there are 20 literacy sites, 20 sites that are really focused on social emotional learning, 14 that are focused on restorative practices, and these sites are going through accelerated implementation. They have enriched coaching. They are a cohort that we selected keeping in mind our resourced mapping that we've been doing from my early days in the district, where we actually look across our city and we look at some of the traditional and historical frankly, under-resourcing that has occurred in various sections of the city. And so what we have done as the school system is to say that we keep that in mind in identification of any additional resources. So you will find across these total of 54 sites, representation throughout the city, but also making sure that we have a concentration of these sites in those communities that have been traditionally and historically underserved in Baltimore. So you'll see some of the elements of that strategy. You'll see what the plan is for expansion of intensive learning sites. This is not, say, a 10-year timeline for all schools to come on board with the appropriate funding, and I have to give a credit to our team within City Schools, Sarah Heaton, who is not here, the Chief of Staff, others, around the philanthropic solicitation of support. What we have heard over and over again from the philanthropic community is that they are pleased to finally have a concrete plan from the district that represents a targeted approach to improvement. And so we are frankly on track, and even though it was a lot of money to raise, we feel confident about our ability to do that. The existence of funds will clearly impact whether we can stay on track. With this time period, you would see ideally by school year 2021, 150 or all traditional Baltimore City public schools would have had the opportunity to be an intensive learning site and receive the same supports that the initial cohort of 54 schools are receiving this year. So the blueprint budget summary, again, one of the things that we have done as a district is we have organized our resources around the priorities, because again, we know from the organizational effectiveness research that whether you are a Fortune 500 company or a local community organization or frankly a school district, your ability to align your resources with your priorities makes you far more likely to actually see impact at a deeper level and a more rapid pace. So what you'll see here is that we have about $42 million, 60% of that $42 million investment is coming from a redistribution of $25 million of city schools dollars. That is just what I like to say about that blue section is that is just city schools internally doing the hard work of realigning our resources, taking what we have and maximizing it around our priorities. You'll also see that we are, as I mentioned earlier, seeking support from private funders in the philanthropic community of $17 million, which would make up the roughly $42 million through the 2021 school year. Blueprint staffing. I know that there were some questions in previous hearings about this. We're happy to take those this evening. What you will see here that I am actually very pleased with is that the majority of the 43 positions associated with the blueprint are focused on providing additional staffing and expertise directly at the school level. So when you see student wholeness room associates, this is part of our blueprint wholeness strategy where we will have places in participating schools, in intensive learning sites, beginning with intensive learning sites where there is now a dedicated staff member who will be trained on how to help de-escalate young people when there's conflict arising, a place for teachers to be able to partner with a full staff person to really help redirect or actually, frankly, stop before it gets started manifestations of behaviors that, frankly, are often indicative of deeper hurt or deeper experiences that need to be addressed. And so we have visited other urban areas that have found great success with this model, and so those 20 student wholeness room associates are directly deployed to schools. Similarly, the literacy coaches, these are literacy experts within city schools that we are developing. One of the things that we have found is that an over-reliance on continually having to have outside experts make the lift for your professional learning in the long run is not developing expertise. I will say very straightforwardly that when I was the chief academic officer, clearly under a different budget scenario, one that I often have wonderful dreams about in my sleep, even though it no longer exists, that actually our district was decimated with talent, and other jurisdictions picked off, quite frankly, indirectly, a lot of our talent during those subsequent years, one, because of budget cuts, and two, because of a sense of unsuredness about what the direction around that work looks like. We have since been hitting the ground, recruiting some of our experts back, developing new folks. And so those 20 literacy coaches, if you talk to some of the literacy intensive sites, they will tell you that is one of the biggest differences, is actually having high-level literacy expertise in the building, developing their teachers. Teachers don't have to go to some far-out site. So that period, I only stopped here because I knew that there were questions about this. Please.
We're going to hold off on questions.
Great, okay. So then I'll move through.
Zeroing in on about 17 or 18 minutes.
Great.
How many more slides do you have?
A lot, so I will stop, and I'll turn it over to John Walker.
Look, I think if there's, if you have 2 to 3 summary slides that you think are absolutely critical, if you want to pick those out and spend no more than a minute, I think that would be probably appropriate, and then I think we're ready to get into questions.
Great, if you're ready to go to questions. So again, I'll go through. Again, these are just quickly where our blueprint priorities were. I will turn it over to Chief Walker to be able to hit some of what I think I know City Council is interested in with regards to building maintenance. I think one of the highlights here that I would just say very quickly is that our budget reflects the additional ground level support that we need with operations to make sure that we are hitting our maintenance targets and maximizing not only our new buildings, but our ability to support our traditional buildings in ways that will not result in the kind of climate challenges that we experienced in January and we have at the beginning of the year with heat. So I'll turn it over to Chief Walker.
Thank you. Good evening, Chairman Costello, other members of the committee, Council President Young, and other members of the City Council. I'm going to go really, really quick through this. If there's anything that you want me to stop me on, I'm happy to do that, but I want to be respectful of your time. This first slide just talks about some of the new 21st century buildings we're looking to put online in the next few years. This gives you an indication of the increase in maintenance and preventive maintenance that we've been putting into our budgets over the past several years. This is our maintenance budget for fiscal year 19. This gives a quick overview of the preventive maintenance broken down by the types of preventive maintenance, and you see that 65% of that is actually for HVAC systems. This just gives you a breakdown of the capital improvement program dollars. This is some of the major projects that are recommended for fiscal year 19. And now we'll go into building the budget. The total allocation for fiscal year 19 is $1.314 billion. $1.156 billion is in the general fund, another $105.2 million in grant funds, and the last $52.8 million is the enterprise fund. That's our food and nutrition or cafeteria fund. This is just a breakdown between fiscal year 18 and 19 of the major sources of revenue in our general fund. And you
John,
see,
I'm sorry to interrupt.
Sure.
But I'm just going to hit the slides that I think are salient to the group as a whole. Let's jump to slide 33. And if you could give a 45-second description of that slide, please.
Okay. This is a breakdown of the $782 million of general funding that goes directly to the schools. You see that $337 million of that is allocated as part of our fair student funding model to our traditional schools. Another $207 million is what we call locked funding. A lot of that is student with disability funding, and also those ELL funding, ELL and principals and so forth that are all locked in our traditional schools. That's what there. $142 million is allocated to our charter schools. Another $79 million of our allocation goes to our unlocked student with disabilities. We allocated $13.7 million for our alternative option programs, and then another $3 million for targeted.
Okay, we're going to skip over charter for now because Allison and Melissa and I met with the council president this morning. I think I have a good summary of it, which I'm going to read when we get to that point, and then you guys can correct me or add anything that you think is appropriate. Let's jump up to, why don't we very briefly hit slide 39. I don't think you need to read through each of them, but just give an overview of what's
39 is just an overview of how we've broken down our centrally budgeted allocations by our individual offices. And it shows with the 18 adopted budget and then the 19 proposed budget or recommended budget that was approved by the board.
Great. Same thing for slide 45, please.
45. Okay. In slide 45, you'll see that our number of students has gone down over a period of years, and although our number of students has gone down at one rate, you'll see that our positions have gone down at a rate at a higher rate than our drop in enrollment. And a lot of that was formed by the central office. Up until fiscal year 2018, all the cuts we had made pretty much came from our central office. Fiscal year 18, as you know, we did have to do some things in our schools and cut some positions there.
Understood. And slide 48, again, just a brief overview and any trends that are worth mentioning in 30 seconds.
48? This one?
Yeah, 48. Yep, right there.
Okay, this one just breaks down our central administration positions by those that we spend more than 80% of their time in schools and those that spend less of their 80% of their time in schools, to give a better idea of just how much is central and how much of our centrally allocated positions are dedicated more than 80% to schools. This is just an appendix of the alternative lending sites, and
Thank you.
thank you.
So I'm going to touch on the charter piece in a minute. I want to first turn it over to Council President Jack Young.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I would like for you to explain to the council the traditional school funding per pupil and the charter school and what all that entails.
Great. Matter of fact, I'm going to ask the Chief of Staff, since she briefed you all this morning, I think it's better that you stay with the consistency.
Thank you.
Thank you, Council
And while you're
President.
doing that, explain also about the traditional schools and how they are supplementing the other stuff.
Sure. So thank you for the question, and thanks for taking the time to meet this morning about it. I'm just going to give kind of a general overview to help give context of how all of our schools are funded. But the charter formula is a revenue-based model, and so it starts with all the revenue that we get from all sources, from state, local, from federal dollars. And then it takes off, what it tries to do is get down to a general education per pupil. So it takes off resources that either are central expenses or are expenses that need to follow the student based on need. So it takes off things like debt service, so payment for bonds for buildings come out because that can't be spent at the school level on a student. It takes off things like retiree health benefits, which have to be paid, to support our retiree health benefits, and so again, it's not a classroom expenditure that we can make. It takes off things like pre-K funding. So pre-K is a mandate from the state that we are required to provide pre-K to all Priority 1 students, which is more than 85% of our population. So that comes off, and if a school has a pre-K, then they get a teacher and a para, so that's on top of their per pupil, but those resources, because of that mandate, have to come off in order to provide that service. It takes off things like special ed, and again, so those dollars come off the top, and then they go to students based on their needs. So each school, charter or traditional school, receives those funding, that funding in the form of cash and services based on the specific population of students that they serve and their specific needs. And similar for English language learners. So if the schools have English language learners, those expenses come off the top and then they get added back on in the form of cash and services based on the needs of students. Similarly for specialized transportation. And the last one to mention is non-public placement. So this is the placement of students who are so severely disabled that they can't be served in our schools, and their individual education plan requires that they be placed in a specialized school that's non-public, and so those resources come off the top to provide that service to those students. Those students are very expensive to serve. They cost on average about $100,000 a year, so those resources need to come off the top. Then you get to a general education per pupil, and then those other services that I just talked about coming off get added back on depending on the population of students.
So Allison, I was just talking with the president. We think now is an appropriate time to read through the summary that they put together this morning.
Before you do that,
Yes,
Mr. Chair, I want you to tell us what is the per pupil cost with traditional and what's the pupil cost with charters.
So the per pupil cost for charter schools next year is $9,017. For traditional schools, it varies depending. There's weights for traditional schools, so it varies depending on how many students living in poverty they have. What are the other weights? I'm blanking on. High school. There's a high school weight. There's a small schools weight.
Can you give us a
Just give us a
range?
ballpark.
So a range. What would be a good range? I average like 6,500. Yeah, so the difference between that roughly 6,500 for traditional schools and the 9,000 or so for charter schools are services that traditional schools are getting in the form of a service as opposed to cash. So for example, for traditional schools, we pay for their principals centrally, we pay for the heat and electricity for their buildings and their building maintenance, we pay for their MTA transportation, we pay for their athletics, their professional development. So those things are paid for separately. That makes up a lot of the difference, but you can't a part of the research we did this year with Educational Resource Strategies, one of our outside consultants, was to try to do an apples-to-apples comparison between the two formulas, and you can't get fully apples-to-apples between the two formulas because there is a certain amount of services that traditional schools are paying for on behalf of charter schools. So there's a certain amount of resources that they are paying on behalf of charter schools because, as per the state guidance, we are allowed to take 2% off for services that charter schools receive, and the cost is greater than that.
Okay. Chair.
Yep. Thank you, Mr. President. So we had some back and forth. We talked about this a little bit at our intro to the fiscal year 2019 budget at the May 17th hearing. So in summary, the cuts, and colleagues, is there anyone who doesn't have a charter school in their district? I think Councilman Schleifer? Okay, so we have 34 charter schools citywide?
Yes.
Okay, so in summary, the cuts originate from 5 sources. The FY 2018 adopted budget was $9,288 per pupil. The FY 2019 proposed budget is $9,017 per pupil, what Allison just said, a difference of $271 per pupil. The difference is the result of 5 specific changes. One, there was a loss of $3.8 million. That was the SWD exclusion. The reason for the reduction is that in FY 2018, BCPSS made a mistake and undercharged charter schools for students with disability funding and the charter formula. According to what you guys have stated on several occasions is that while the money could have been taken back, it was not, so as to avoid school-level disruptions for the FY 17-18 school year. Charter school boards, operators, and principals were informed of this mistake in November 2017. They were told that BCPSS would not be seeking to recoup the mistaken appropriation. However, that the calculation would be corrected in the FY 2019 budget. Is that correct, or anything to add for that one item?
Nope, that is correct.
Okay. Number 2, there was a loss of $600,000. This is due to projected enrollment. Projected enrollment is expected to be down, according to BCPSS, a sum total of 87 students across all 34 charter schools. Anything to add? Great. Number 3, a loss in $1.5 million. This was a change in the 2% fee. The 2% fee for administration expenses was moved where it is deducted from after certain system-wide deductions, regardless of school classification, traditional or charter. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay. Number 4, there was actually a gain of $400,000. There was a decrease in changes and exclusions in the funding model for charters, resulting in a $400,000 surplus back to charter schools. We're good there? Okay. And number 5, there was a loss of $1.8 million non-distributed fringe charges. This was due to a variety of factors, including sick leave conversion, tuition reimbursement, and long-term substitutes. These 3 factors impacted school budgets across the entire system, regardless of classification, i.e. charter versus traditional, and the reductions did in fact occur to each and every school in the system at the same rate. Is that correct?
That's correct.
And the sum total across all charter schools is a net loss for that entire pot at $7.1 million. Is that correct? Okay, thank you. Mr. President?
Thank you. Okay, on page 26, where it talks about the section of Title I funding. It's in the book, 26 in your book. This section states that the Baltimore City Public School System took advantage of the U.S. Department of Agriculture Community Eligibility Provision to allow low-income districts to provide free breakfast and lunch to all students. However, when moving to CEP, Baltimore City Public Schools stopped collecting Title I poverty data using free and reduced lunch form. As such, the city has moved to a more restrictive poverty measure that has the effect of undercounting immigrant students. thus impacting the school budget, allocation, and grant eligibility. The city is currently looking for a new poverty measure. So my question is, rather than finding a new Title I poverty measure, can Baltimore City Public Schools still process free and reduced lunch forms as evidence of Title I poverty while also completing the CEP application to cover all students with free breakfast and lunch?
No,
You can't?
no.
Okay. Can you state why?
Well, because part of why we went to the CEP in the first place was, one, having challenges in collecting the forms. Did you also want to add? Go ahead.
I'd just like to add that part of the CEP program was that the federal government did not want us to be collecting lunch forms. That was part of the process. All of our children ate for free. The first year that we were that we were eligible to do it, we actually did not do it because the free and reduced lunch forms would have affected or could have affected our compensatory education, which is part of the funding model with the state. We went back to the state and we had a number of 84.91% added to the law of the state funding formula to say up till 2022, we will get 84.91% of our students will be considered in poverty for purposes of compensatory education. But as long as we have the community eligibility provision to give free breakfast and lunch to our students, we cannot collect lunch forms. We would have to use the state, we would have to use some sort of alternate income form. And our fear there was if we had an alternate income form that would that would not have a free, a free breakfast or lunch or a free meal behind it, they would even be harder to collect back. And as a result, our eligibility would have potentially gone down, which could have affected our compensatory education funding. So that's why we opted out of trying to do any type of an alternate form.
But don't you get funding for all the students that eat the breakfast and lunch? Does it affect your budget in any kind of way?
We get a reimbursement from the federal government for every breakfast and lunch that we serve, but we also have costs there too. And
so all the children, the immigrants, everybody get free lunch?
eats for free.
Everybody eats for free. The challenge, which Chief Walker just said, is that number is also used for other funding, right? The compensatory funding. So the concern is that if we were to shift that number, that eligibility number, which frankly was a peak number for the district, would be significantly lower, and then lower the amount of compensatory funding. We would still get the money for the actual food, but it's that number is also used to determine the amount of compensatory funding. That's part of the concern and the vulnerability.
Okay, thank you.
Sure.
Thank you, Mr. President. I have one question. Colleagues, I'm going to ask that we all limit our questions to one question just because everyone on the council is here, I think with the exception of Councilman Reisinger, who's out of the country. So I will, I'm going to start off. We heard a lot of concerns over the changes to the charter funding formula. I'm not intimately familiar with what the guidelines are at the state level. Madam Chair, we spent a lot of time talking about this a couple Fridays ago, and Allison, we've talked about this. I don't know if the changes are right or not, but what I do know is that it seems like each and every year the school system in its budget takes additional things from the charter pot of money and spreads it out across the entire system. And I'm not suggesting whether that's right or wrong, but I believe it's safe to say the chair is of the same mindset that I am, that at some point we have to kind of stop the bleeding and say, you know what, we're not going to take any more from the charters. We're going to agree this is the baseline, and that's what it's going to be moving forward. So one, Madam Chair and also CEO, could you guys confirm that you guys are on the same page with that? And two, can you talk about the process that you've identified for me that Madam Chair, we've discussed, Allison, we talked about it in great detail this morning, how that's going to work and how we're going to make that assurance so that our charter operators and principals and teachers and parents, et cetera, have assurance that there's going to be a level of predictability each year that's solely based on enrollment so that they can operate their school and ensure that they are productive throughout the year.
Yes, I'll say a few words and then I'll turn it over to Dr. Santelises. You correctly referenced our conversation. We can justify, because we had the help from the consultants that frankly came in to help us with last year's budget, structural budget deficit, and we really wanted to get some outside people with some eyes on that. But when they opened everything up, you know, we had them look at everything. And that's where we identified the additional items to make the adjustments to the formula. Okay, fine. We can defend it. We can show you the numbers. But from a board standpoint, we agree with you. There needs to be a level of predictability for charters, right? So I said publicly during the budget presentation that this is the last time I would vote for a budget that had a new number that we just discovered. Like, I went on record. I know there's a couple of other commissioners. I'm not going to reference them now, but that is a absolute statement from me. I will not vote for another budget that surprises anybody on that number. We also know that there have been disagreements over the years. I was on the first, when it was first created, there wasn't even a charter law. It was 1997. It was a New Schools Advisory Board, and I served on it from 1997. There has never been agreement between the charter community and the school administration since 1997, when this all started. So we know that we have got to arrive at a number that, even if you don't like totally agree on everything, it's been publicly debated. Everybody understands the basis, they understand the line items, and while it might not be like everybody agrees on everything because there's different positions, it's defensible. The numbers are clear, we've looked at it together, we've agreed to it, and I am advocating, we haven't finalized the actual format, but I'm advocating that those conversations actually take place in a public format, not so that there can be some big, debate, everybody testifying. No, we want a set of people, including charters, including traditional schools, including contract schools, including school board members, including people from the staff, having a conversation about this that other people can listen to so that they actually understand the numbers. We have just as many people coming to testify before us that say, why are the charters getting so much more money? Well, there's a basic reality. They have to pay for more. So there's a whole set of people that think charters are getting too much money, and there's a whole other set of people that think traditional schools are getting too much money. I think part of it is because we haven't actually discussed in public what's the basis for all the numbers. And once everybody knows, then everybody should do their own homework, pay attention to the conversation, look at the numbers, ask questions, and then we'll agree on a number, and that will be the number. That's my personal position. No, that's not my personal position. The board has had discussions about this. We're committed to being part of this process, and it's being structured right now.
I would like to just say, well said to the board chair. I'm glad she went first. And just to say that we're in complete agreement, and that the precarious nature of not knowing what the funding formula will be, right? What will be included, what will not. We realize this has to stop. I said the same thing to staff, right? And I also want to be clear in what I've said in another session, and actually it was more of a public setting there. One of the things I said is, actually the recommendations that came back from ERS were far deeper, would have meant far deeper cuts to recalibrate some of the services that charters are not paying for. And one of the things that occurred when you went through, Councilman Costello, each of those 5 areas, there was a real reluctance on my part to just go full sail with everything they had recommended that wasn't crystal clear and clearly defensible, right? That was one of the things that we said, because as the board chair has said, there wasn't when I was here as CAO. It was just that there was more money. And so people weren't as under pressure to know what the formula was. Charters generally had what they needed. Traditional schools felt like they generally had enough. You had murmuring back and forth from time to time, but it never bubbled up to the point where the need to be explicit about what is counted as a service that charters will pay for, and what is counted as, right, an overhead cost that the district incurs on behalf of other charters has always been opaque. It was opaque when I arrived here 9 years ago. I think what we are saying, and I just want to reinforce that the board chair has said, that the board in total has really pushed for, is opening up the light to what that formula is and having real hard discussions about what are the services, right, that charters may or may not want from the district, which is fine, and what is the cost of those services. That is a laborious task. To go through the amount of services that Central poorly or wonderfully provides is a laborious task. And for anybody on council, but I'm sure there are many of you, you know the whole theory behind billable hours is that you bill for everything that you do on behalf, right, of the client or the recipient. What we are trying to do now is have that discussion, as the board chair has said, in full light. And so that actually what is represented this year as a cut, right, actually mirrors the least, the lowest amount of cut that was advised. Because I did not feel comfortable taking any kind of severe cut to charters, because charters are still Baltimore City Public Schools. Right? They are our schools. If we did not want charter schools, why would we have 34 of them? Why would we continue, even in a budget crisis, to receive wholeheartedly applications? And we have approved new charters since I have been here. So it is not about do we not want charters, but it is about how are we clear and transparent in ways that we have not been about what the cost of those services are, and, to your point, right, with a level of predictability. Because I would not expect any school leader worth their weight in salt to say, okay, I finally got it down, and now this year, oh great, change it on me again, and then expect me to be fiscally responsible. So I think that there is full agreement. We are engaging in that process now. We have had a number of charters who have said that they want to be part of the process. Some have said they do not. We have folks representing traditional schools who want to be part of the process. So instead of having backroom discussions, the real challenge now is how do we have an open discussion when we know that there are many benefits from both traditional and charter schools. We need both.
Thank you. I definitely feel reassured about that. I would ask that you keep the council looped in as that conversation continues to evolve, especially related to milestones such as public meetings, any board meetings where you'll be voting on that, et cetera.
As a general proposition, having the council looped in is going to happen early and often. If there's one thing I've learned this year is that not looping the council in, you know, like who benefits from that? So I apologize for having made that mistake on a couple of other issues. We're totally committed to that on this and other things.
Thank you. There were two things that I failed to mention earlier, and I'm going to pass it on and respect the one question rule that we set. Something that the council president and I learned this morning, which I think is worth mentioning publicly, these need-based exclusions, which account for a significant portion of the school system's budget, about $292 million. Those include three things that we often talk about. Students with disabilities, funding for that. ESL, or English for Speakers of Other Language funding, many of us call it ESL. And specialized transportation funding for students that generally have physical disabilities. Those three things that sum $292 million, and I can't speak for the rest of my colleagues, but the president and I weren't aware that those get divvied up regardless of whether or not you're a traditional or a charter school. They really get divvied up based on population. So if you have 10 kids in your school who are ESL versus one kid who's ESL in another school, that one school is getting 10 times more. If you have 0, you get 0. And the same thing goes for the cost of the specialized transportation funding and for students with disabilities. So that's really important to note. I'm glad that we know that now. That helps provide much needed context as we're having this discussion with our constituents, whether they're teachers or students or principals, parents, et cetera. The other thing that I'd like to point out as part of the city council's budget process is that the budget that is before us for the school system is a budget that the board has approved. It's a budget that's proposed by the CEO and her team, and it's approved by the board chair and her team. It's not set by the city council. The city council does not have the authority to change that budget. The city council has one matter in front of it this week with respect to the school system. There's 3 bills. There's the ordinance of estimates, the budget, there's the tax rate, and then there's the school system allocation. That's what we're talking about. And this year it's $278 million some odd dollars. There are only 2 things that we can do with that on the council, and I think it's important for the public to understand this. We can either approve that and you get your $278 million check, or we can attempt to not approve it. I don't even know that legally we can actually not approve it. Even if we were to take legislative action to not approve it, you would still get the money. We're not in a position to say you should move the $7.1 million from traditional schools or transportation funding or school nurses or whatever the case may be. We can't move any of that around, so it's important that we're clear about that. And I think that we need to, and please take this as positive criticism, one of the things that I think needs to be made clear and that hopefully the board can assist with next year during this process is saying this is our budget. Once it passes through the school board and the school board approves it, that's the budget that we're going with. We've already got our state allocation. We're going to go get approval for our city allocation. But the city council and the mayor, and this goes for the mayor too, have no control over what that allocation is. I'm not suggesting you've made the right decisions or the wrong decisions. I'm just pointing out that we are very limited in our options on the council as well as the mayor.
Do you mind? No. So I want to make sure I can do what I understand what you're asking. So you want me to make sure that next year when we go through the process to state that so people are sort of clear about the process?
Yeah, and we
that's
can work
easy to
together
do.
on that. I just want to make sure that we're all on the same page, educating everyone
Yeah.
who's a
Fair enough.
stakeholder in the system. That, and again, this isn't to push it on you per se. We just want to set reasonable
That's fair
expectations
enough.
so we know what everyone's role in the process is.
Because when we every time we make a budget presentation, we start it with reminding people of the process and the timeline, when the community meetings are. It would be really easy to follow it all the way to the end. Because not right now in our school board presentations, we treat the end as when we vote.
Sure.
But that's actually not the end.
I wasn't suggesting there was something that you didn't do.
No, that's
I
cool.
just want to make sure we all work together more cohesively to continue to share that message so that everyone's on the same page, what everyone's role is in the
Got it.
process. Thank you. I appreciate it. Councilman Pinkett.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I preface my comments by saying that truly this is not directed to the school system, but this is my second budget cycle being on the council, and this portion of the budget hearings is the least favorite for me, because sometimes in the midst of this conversation, I almost forget that we're talking about our most valued asset in the city and our young people. And at some point, this isn't even about budget anymore. This is about the value that we put on young people, and we're gonna be really accountable for what we didn't do for these young people. I mean, where we're almost treating them like a widget. I mean, there is no greater investment than we can make, and we continue to know that even what we're providing for them, and I'm not just talking about the city, state, I mean, on all levels, and to not prioritize, they should be at the top of the budget, and then everything else gets figured out afterwards. But that is not my question, but we got to figure this thing out. I know at the last quarterly update, I asked about the health insurance and asked for the school system to provide an analysis of any potential cost savings that could be experienced by the system if the school system aligned their health insurance coverage with the Baltimore City. Do we have that information at this point?
We don't have that information. We're still working on the
Okay.
analysis. And as I said last time, we have put our health insurance stuff out for bid.
Mm-hmm.
It's being evaluated now. I don't think it's going to be done for another probably month.
Okay.
But during that time, we are starting to take a look at it. We have negotiated agreements with our largest union, BTU, that go through calendar year 19. So anything that we would begin to do would go into effect for calendar year 20.
Okay, I mean, that's fine, and I understand it takes time, but I'm committed to keep asking every time you come in.
I understand.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Councilman. Councilman Scott?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And Dr. Sindley, St. Alicia's, thanks for being here and thanks for all that you do for our young people. My question tonight is we only get one question, right, Mr. Chair?
Yeah, yes, but we're going to cycle through. I can already tell.
So my first question is a very easy one. Okay. What can we do to help you guys? What more can this council do to help the school system reach its ultimate goal of serving all the children in Baltimore in the best way to provide them with a world-class education?
So can I just admit forthrightly that, wow, that wasn't what I was expecting. So that's a great question that I wish I had prepared more thoroughly. I think what I would say, Councilman Scott, and to the entire City Council, the on-the-ground advocacy for the state, for the Kerwin piece is a big deal for us right now. It really is. And I've said before, I am an academician at my core. I did not expect to come back into Baltimore City Public Schools and have to be talking about finance and funding to the level that I am. And I'm just being straight with folks. This is not what I wanted to do. I wanted to be talking about blueprint stuff. I wanted to talk about student voice. I did not want to have to drag up every financial analytics class that I have ever taken in my entire career. But I think you and other members of the City Council know that this is a moment in time. And the ability to work with us, to lend your insights, and this goes back to what the board chair said, and I own that we've got to work together around this so that within roles, within people's specialty areas and, particular spheres of influence, we can work together around that. But if I had one priority for now, just right now immediately, it would be to help us partner on the Kerwin piece. This is going to determine the amount of money that young people get for this iteration of a generation. And that would be first. And then I think second, which many of you do, even in your questions, is to continue to push in ways that I think the mayor is pushing as well, for an integration of work around our young people being the core and starting with young people and moving out, not starting with adult functions first. And you know this as well as anybody, right? When we talk about student safety, you know where the walls of one place ends and the other begins. I think your continued pushes and suggestions around how we shift the way we do the work to start with what makes most sense for our young people and then move out is the right push. And I did an interview earlier today, and someone said, well, what do you think about it? And I said, what I'm hoping most is that we shift to looking at schools and young people through an ecosystem lens rather than a departmental lens. And you all champion that because you guys are on the street every single day, right? Many of you, right? You're out talking to constituents. I do appreciate the feedback when you say, this is a trend I'm hearing among some of the constituents. We sometimes will type out a quick answer, but I do take all of that in. So I would say long term, that does help. Don't underestimate that. But overall, this Kerwin piece is a big deal. And yeah, if I had gone to Alabama, I think I looked at the Ed Trust chart today of states with regressive school funding. By the way, Maryland fell right in the middle, so you'll be happy about that. But if I had gone to Alabama, I would have expected that. I did not expect that in the state of Maryland, given our education trajectory. I got to tell you, I didn't expect it. So that's what I would say.
And thank you. I think we all know that I spend a good bit of my time these days talking about the Caring Commission, but I think it's just as a follow-up, if you could provide specific things that you want the council to be involved in, please let us know.
That would be great. Thank you.
That's my first question, Mr. Chair.
Councilman Slifer.
Yes, thank you very much, and thank you, CEO, for coming. You know, it definitely is eye-opening hearing what the chair said about really how little say the council has in, you know, the overall scheme of things. But it was encouraging to hear the board chair come forth and basically say that we really should have a greater seat at the table. I mean, I really look at the council as that first line, that liaison between the community and the different agencies. And it's been troubling. I mean, in the first, this is our second budget process, but last year with the crisis that was going on, and again this year, hearing people on both sides of the aisle between charter funding and traditional school funding, when we're really just talking about making sure that each kid has equal access to great schools. And then looking through and reading, I read the budget book through a few times, and I have a whole series of questions, which obviously I can't ask because we only get one. But what I would ask is that we just do a little bit more to work together and to engage, so that we don't get to this point now where we have no say in the matter to try to discuss and try to work through some of those issues, but rather on the front end that we have the opportunity to be a partner and to assist, whereas last year it just felt like we were in crisis mode and we all worked together to try to do the best that we can to get out of that crisis. And then this year it seems like we have another crisis. And
I wouldn't call it a crisis this year.
The parents that are reaching out to us, who have, you know, whose kids are in certain schools and who are concerned about the budget, and there's a lot of things that aren't clear to the council, and certainly aren't clear to the parent body. It is a crisis to them, and so it just seems like that we're currently we're having that year over year, and I just ask that we do more going forth to next year to work together, so that we don't feel that we don't have hundreds of emails coming through of parents feeling that there's a crisis and a lot of things that are not clear in the funding, and so that would be my request.
No, fair enough. And I think that you heard from both the board chair and myself that we are more than willing to, earlier in the process, any questions, particularly based on the last 2 years, that any council person wants to either send early. The chief of staff just came over today to have a meeting because we felt like it was important, that the council president, that the committee chair had an in-depth understanding. We offered to do that. So I think as we develop the ongoing two-way communication, and where issues and questions are surfaced prior to 100 families calling. And one of the things I do want to say about that is part of why I said I have just a different vantage point of whether we're in crisis. What I would say is we had large numbers of traditional schools in crisis. The difference was that they did not have families who flooded phone calls. We have schools that took severe cuts last year, traditional schools, while frankly charter funding formula increased. So I would say that it is the reverberation of last year's challenge, and it is a challenge that if we look nationally, yes, I too do not like having to scrape by, but I will tell you one of the characteristics of large urban districts across this country that serve large numbers of young people of color and large numbers of first-generation college goers and large numbers of low-income students, one of the things that is true, and that there is a constant cycle of underfunding. We have 3 state commissions that have said, 3 state commissions, not my commissions, I was in Boston when the first one was commissioned. 3 state commissions that have said that the city of Baltimore, based on the poverty level, the number of first-generation college goers, the number of young people of color who have experienced systemic, generational racism, our current funding is inadequate. It is inadequate. And I stand before you as someone who has enough knowledge of decisions that are made at the state level over decades. And it is a decision, I continue to say this, some people don't like when I say it, but I'm going to say it again. It is a community-based decision about whether we are going to fund the education of young people who do not have people to advocate for them. Those folks calling, they called because their formula wasn't touched last year. They didn't take the cuts other schools did. It's just a reverberation. It's just, and I will say, those cuts could have been steeper, but because I did not want to decimate families and schools, we kept it to the minimal amount. But I do think, and I will continue to advocate for, us not being distracted by the shiny object or the cat going after the laser light, while the main issue continues to be leapfrogged over and relegated to a corner. And so while I am in this seat, in the same way that Councilman Pinkett is saying he's going to continue to ask questions, other folks are going to continue to ask questions, I am going to stand here before you and continue to say that there is a much larger issue, and I'm not going to get fully distracted on the shiny objects that dance on the wall when we have a fundamental issue that 3 outside commissions have said is an issue. We are just choosing to not see that as the issue.
Right, and so just for the record, at least my office, I can't speak for any other office, received far more calls last year than we did this year, just for the record. And again, to piggyback off of what Councilman Scott said, we are your partner. We want to help in any way we can, and I certainly would love to know more about these things. And again, I'm just hearing for the first time about this meeting that occurred this morning, and it's the first time some of my colleagues also are hearing about this meeting from this morning. And I'm just saying that we did not get this information, and so information. Obviously, there's a lot, and I appreciate
Sure.
everything you're bringing to the table. And again, we want to be able to relay that to the community and help you in any way that we can, but we have to have the information. And so I'm hearing a lot of things for the first time based on what the chairman said here. And I didn't know about a briefing this morning, and I was not aware of other ones that were available before then. And that's why I'm just looking towards next year and saying that we do want to help in any way we can, but we need to have that information.
Well, let me respond to that. The chair of the Budget Committee and myself was briefed because I asked for a briefing with the chair and myself. If we had all the committee members there, we were in violation of the Open Meetings Act. I didn't want to do that. The budget chair is the person that's running the budget committee, and it was me and him.
And I will just add that, again, moving forward, as I opened with, more than happy that now that we have had 2 cycles together, to say if we need to have certain meetings or public briefings ahead of time, we are more than willing to do that. Putting together a $1.3 billion budget every year is a lot of work. And so, no, it's not all the time that we have the finished product ready for you, but what I commit to, and I know that the board chair does, is when there are briefings that would be beneficial and would help you all ask more informed questions earlier, we're more than happy to do that.
Thank you.
Thank you, and I'm going to send out right now the summary that I drafted up this morning and just posted online. Next up, Councilman Henry.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Good evening, Madam CEO.
Good evening, Councilman.
I love you.
I know.
And I love to hear your passion, and I appreciate what you're saying. Whenever I see or hear arguments or fights between charter advocates and system advocates over why is this school getting this much money and why isn't this school getting more money, my mental image is of crabs fighting in a barrel, because the problem is that Baltimore City isn't getting enough money and that there's chronic underfunding by the state. I appreciate the advice and your answer to my colleague's question of what we can do to help in terms of leaning into the current process. My memories from the 90s are getting dimmer, but what I remember from before the city-state partnership that created the current structure. I remember a lot of the same feeling that Baltimore had been chronically underfunded for an extended period of time. And at that point, there was a question of suing the state in federal court to get the state to provide sufficient resources to live up to the constitutional mandate that they provide a proper education for every child in the state. I'm not going to ask you if you support suing the state. I'm not going to do that to you.
And I appreciate that.
The chair has asked me not to put the people at the podium in those kind of positions. We went through this extensively earlier in the day with a different agency. What I would ask is if you could go into a little bit more detail about how we can help with the Kerwin process. What I want to be prepared for is how can we lay the groundwork for a plan B if Kerwin does not go sufficiently?
Mm-hmm. Sure, and there always has to be a plan B, right? And I don't focus on the plan B because that's just the advocate side of me. But I will say this, look, you know, people have asked what happens if you don't get all of the money that you have up, you know, for the blueprint. Well, we're going to do the work anyway. The question is just how fast and to what level of depth. So, you know, and I won't say I'm the only person in the room for who this is true for, but I will only speak for myself. You know, look, I come from a long line of people who educated folks in the back hills when it was illegal. So it's not about will we educate. We have teachers. I mean, I talked to one of our staff people from Restorative Practices who drives an hour and 45 minutes each way every day because he wants to teach the young people in Baltimore City. We will always have people who care enough about the young people of Baltimore City that we will educate them. But I think the real question is to what level? And with all that we have, and I promise I won't riff too long, with all that we know now about neuroscience, about human development, about growing income and equity, I'm also not going to sit up and say that we have what we need to do what the research and the track record and everything else tells us. We know what it takes. Am I still going to do it? Of course. There were people who, under the threat of death, taught kids to read. So of course we're going to continue to do that. But at least while I am CEO, I don't want any questions about why we don't have a citywide orchestra. You know why we don't have a citywide orchestra? Because we can't provide a recorder for every second grader like they did in my hometown with a licensed music teacher to teach the recorder so that when you get to middle school, you get handed one of 6 instruments that your parents don't have to pay for. And then you get a district that sends large teams outside of Baltimore School for the Arts, which, oh, by the way, we also fund at a different level, and you see the outcomes we get there, right? And then say, how come we don't have state championships that we are winning in orchestra and jazz band competitions? Not when our kids are competing against kids in Montgomery County who have the recorder in 2nd grade and get private jazz lessons beginning in 7th grade and then have 4 levels of competitive bands. That's what I'm talking about. We will educate, but I will tell you, and I think you guys know this after 2 years, I will not stand up here and pretend like you get that level of performance for tidbit investment, because it's not true, and the neuroscience doesn't bear it out. If you look at all of the literature, I'm more than happy to forward it to you, of the growing income inequality gap. A lot of it is because those with more money are investing earlier and more in the education and development of the talent of their children. And our kids are not getting the same. So let's not, yeah, we're going to teach them to read. Yes, there are outliers. Yes, I will continue to remove administrators who are not effective. But let's not play games about where you get, what it takes to get to that level. Because I know too much and I've been around too long. So yeah, when people talk to me about, and the arts folks know that's why we're great partners. So if we want a citywide orchestra that wins national competitions, then we have to seed a citywide orchestra that wins state and national competitions. Sorry, that may have been a little too passionate.
Never.
We're lucky to have you.
Oh, thank you, Councilman.
Councilman Cohen.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Good to see you, Dr. Santelices. You know, you were talking about this sort of moment that we're in, and it's interesting. I've been talking to some folks from the state that we are both from, Massachusetts, about what their moment was when they fundamentally decided to flip the script and fund their schools. Much like we now find ourselves, Massachusetts was, do you know what the year was? It was...
Sorry, I shouldn't say we, I'm a Marylander now. You mean when Massachusetts went to the state, the new state standards, is that what you mean?
No, when they
actually redid the funding?
1984, yeah.
Thank you, look at that. Good,
Yeah.
Councilman Scotch, look at that.
Hold on.
Thank you, sir.
You know, but fundamentally having to make a decision, like you said, about whether we value education as a economic strategy, as a wellness strategy, as a health strategy, and they chose yes. And lo and behold, look at where Boston is, look at where the town you grew up and the town I grew up in are doing, just in terms of what children can expect out of an education. And I think this is very much that moment for the state of Maryland. I think you're right. We have to decide whether kids in Baltimore, PG, Montgomery, any of these places are worth what we say they're worth, or whether they should be learning in buildings that are on the verge of collapse. It was no great wonder for those of us who've either taught or been around schools that all of our boilers burst. So I think you're absolutely right. This is that moment for Maryland. It's do or die. We have to either choose to step up or condemn another generation of kids. That being said, wanted to dig in a little bit on your blueprint, specifically around student wholeness. Wondered sort of what that concept means to you, in absence of robust funding for all the things that we know make kids whole. And did want you to weigh in. We've had this conversation a little bit about the community school strategy. One of the other contributions that we as a council, as a city, the mayor makes is about $6.5 million through the Family League to support the community school strategy. And just wanted to hear your thoughts on how that relates to the student wholeness piece. Because again, when you look at kids that have asthma, learning challenges, higher rates of diabetes than everywhere else in the state, we know they're going to need more than what we can currently provide in a classroom. So if you could talk a little bit about that.
So you actually did a good job saying what they are, even in your question. But I would say where we have chosen to begin, and this gets back to my statement of course we're going to educate children. Where we have prioritized, if you look in the blueprint, is starting with restorative practices, because we have some traction, we have some exemplars. As a matter of fact, the meeting that I referenced earlier that I attended right before coming to this hearing was with the intensive learning sites around restorative practices. And I went around to tables with principals and teachers, and one of the things they were most excited about was having strategies to create spaces for young people with more positive school cultures overall. They got to hear from Principal Rhonda Raquetta at City Springs, who's been implementing restorative practices for years, and talked about the radical shift in their ability to care for young people as part of just the business of how we do schools. That's certainly not everything, but it is a priority. The other place that we're starting is really around this social emotional learning piece. And schools, the other 20 sites that are partnering with Castle and will be doing work across the district. And we've had fits and starts, so admittedly, but is really to look at each individual school's set of resources to say, what are we strong in? So there are some schools that have done a lot of work in diversity challenges, right, and issues, and like, what does racial bias look like? We haven't done it as a district yet. But what the Castle affords us to do is say, what are the things within this school community where the major gaps are to begin around social emotional learning, and what's the major work that's already gone on. And then that was reinforced with me, and one of the things that gave me incredible hope was a meeting that I had last night that I know a number of city council members have also had, but I had the chance to really meet and talk with over dinner members of Baltimore's community grassroots organizations. And what was so heartening was to have a room of people who said, we not only care about our young people, we not only have been doing it long before I was CEO, and they'll be doing it long after I am CEO, but they really want to partner. Like, they really want to say, how do we get more systematic about it? How is it not just a school here or a school there? But how do we use some of those resources in a more planful way rather than just go partner with a school, and some schools have great partners and other schools don't. So I think that even without Kerwin, if I look at my plan B, as Councilman Henry said, look, we're going to do that work, and we had a room packed with people last night who believe in the blueprint and really want to begin to build out, to your point, the wholeness piece. We started where we heard some of the most intense challenges. I know that you have rightly cited previously about, what does it take, what other additional skills does an educator need to be able to successfully educate and care for young people who have experienced trauma. And so we're launching some of that training this summer for folks who really want to prioritize that. So we're beginning in that area. But wholeness also means having music and having art and having athletics and having the other things that make you want to come to school. Community schools, I think, fits in that in the way that you described, that it's about wraparound, it's about meeting the needs of young people that go beyond just, what are you doing in this class, and do you have a pencil and do you have some paper, right? Knowing that those outside forces impact. The board, frankly, before I came back to Baltimore CEO, the board had already put a stake in the ground around community schools, and has expressed since then that they want every school in Baltimore City to be a community school. I think where we are now, with a large number of community schools in name, is really taking a step back and saying, what do we mean by a high quality community school? And that it's more than just having a community schools coordinator, even though a really effective one can do great work, but we're seeing variability. So there are some schools that are community schools where, to be frank, they've got a community school coordinator, but the partnerships aren't as robust to really address some of the challenges that you were describing. And so a lot of the work that we've prioritized now around community schools is, how do we not just kind of expand to expand, but how do we make sure that we have real robust community schools that actually reach young people. I unfortunately had a death in my family. I was scheduled to meet with superintendents of other districts when the National Community Schools Conference was just here. But what was wonderful is there was such a community of colleagues who are working on this in similar communities, and some communities that are very different. Rural communities should have community schools. But there was agreement, even in that, you always get me water, thank you so much. But there was agreement, even in some of the small groups and with folks that I talked to after, that we've really got to wrestle with this question of, what does it take to have a high quality community school, and not just a community school in name only. What are the components? How do we dig more deeply in that? And so that's what we're working on. I'd say now, yes, the board, like I said, was clear before I got here. the ultimate goal is for every Baltimore City public school to be a community school, but I think there's also agreement that we have to get right what those elements are. And we have community schools that are exemplars that actually Dr. Kerwin has visited to inform the Kerwin Commission's work. So, we get beat up in one article, but then in the next, then 2 weeks later, people are like, oh, we hear you're doing great work here, and we want, now that doesn't make it to the dialogue, right? But yes, see, so you can coach me, Council President, but yes, it is, they beat you up one day and then they want to come learn from you the next. But I think that conference was a great opportunity to really wrestle with some of the hard questions about what does deep implementation, for lack of a better term, or deep development of real robust community schools look like. But again, the board went on record with that. I'll give them credit for it long before I arrived, but I think what we've done is really accelerated the work around.
I think it could be an area of great partnership. I know many of my colleagues and I deeply believe in the strategy and have seen it work in a lot of instances, and we're in the community in a,
You are. No, and we should, and what would be great, and then maybe we'll follow up, it would be great to have some discussions about what, what the council's involvement might look like from your perspective in that. Like, we clearly are doing the work, but what kind of involvement makes sense given the council's role and given your interactions and work in the community already, that would help us be better suited to partner with you and better prepared to do that.
Great, thanks.
Thanks.
Councilwoman Sneed.
Good evening. So I'm curious, since we can only have one question, homelessness in Baltimore City, and then homelessness, especially with our young children. I'm just curious, for those students who are homeless, can you talk about how you guys interact, how you make sure that they get to school, or how you even identify that they are homeless?
So there's so many elements that touch homeless students, right? So everything from identifying students that are officially homeless, meaning I really have no place. My family has no place to stay now. I have no address, versus young people who I would call, and I'm sure that there's an official term, it's just not quite my area of specialty, right? But who are home unstable, right? Who so may not officially be listed as homeless, but are moving 3 to 4 times a year, right? Just because, that's how they survive, or they're bouncing from family member and friend's house to friend's house, and so they're not officially listed as homeless, but they might as well be. One of the things we do know, and again, we have an office, and it comes under wholeness, and our Jim Padden does a great job with some of the psychological impacts of those young people. Dr. Washington knows firsthand, as does Chief Scroggins. They both know that one of the greatest drivers of our transportation costs is homelessness, like the steady, significant increase of homeless students that we need to transport from their location back to their home original school, because that's our way of promoting stability, right? So that if young people can stay in their home school, even if they're moving locations, right, or they're in shelters, it helps provide some stability, which is the right thing to do, but it costs money. And so it impacts on a transportation end, it impacts absolutely on a psychological end for young people. And then this even came up with our discussion of something as boring, I'm sure to all of you all, as like curriculum, right? And so when teachers were going back and forth about, well, can't we all just do different curriculum? And I said, but what if you're a young person who moves 4 times a year, and you're in the 1st grade, and you're trying to learn to read, and you bump from school to school, and everybody's got a different approach about how they're learning to read? That doesn't serve that young person well, particularly because we know that the period of around late kindergarten, 1st, 2nd grade, young people who move multiple times during that critical period of reading are far more susceptible and vulnerable to reading challenges. So it really does impact a number of different areas. You know, principals see it and know it, but I will tell you it's a major driver. You know, when we look at transportation, and Dr. Washington can tell you, you know, I bring folks up and I say, why are the costs going up? This is crazy, blah, 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 blah. And there are things that we can do, but when I look at the homeless numbers, and I don't know, do you know what so like 1,500. And a lot of children, right? And if you factor in cabs, which was good because I hadn't mentioned that, so forget the buses. If we don't even have the bus routes, then we're putting those young people in cabs, which is also an increased cost. So it impacts so many different areas. I don't know if that really answers your question. Right.
It's been looked at every which way from Sunday.
You're talking to Mike.
Sorry.
Yes.
This is one of the things, I mean, I know when I first joined the board, I had that same like, are you kidding me look on my face. And when you think about, it's okay, it's a good look. When you think about the instability of homeless students, they're not on a predictable bus route. It's hard to use the MTA system. I mean, so we have essentially absorbed that cost in cabs, and it's expensive. But we have to serve them. I mean, we want to serve them.
So they get served by the
Councilwoman Clark.
Thank you so much for the passion and anger that you direct in the right directions, which is the fact that for generations now, the children of Baltimore City have not been adequately funded as the Constitution of this state demands. And we end up fighting with each other because that's what people do when there are just scraps on the table. That's not what we want to be doing, and you've told us very clearly this evening, as always, go fight the right fight. And I'm happy to hear the president of the board say that with regard to fair student funding, I'm putting words in your mouth, but I think I'm interpreting correctly. As far as fair student funding is concerned, the elements that are being developed and that are emerging as components of how those numbers are put together for charters as well as for traditional schools do deserve a full airing and discussion and understanding in this community. It's not going to stop the tension, but it would help the information and certainly help us in Annapolis so that we don't let that be used against us here as a city. I want to thank you, though, Doctor and President and school board and staff and all, for the success that the Baltimore, and Allison, for the success that the Baltimore City Public Schools has had working with the SOMOS group of students. Now, these are students, you know, I'm just saying it for my colleagues that don't know, maybe. This is a group of students who who are either immigrants or are first generation or just plain interested and concerned. So many of our students in the public schools are ESOL, smart as can be, but can't have had low numbers competing into our schools that require, our high schools that require certain grades, et cetera, certain admission standards. And I'm not going to name some because then I won't name them all, and then I'll get emails about that instead about fair student funding. So the school system has worked with the SOMOS group of students, many of whom are from City College. I have to say that in my family. And have succeeded this year so well it doesn't sound like a big number, but it's a huge number, that 55 students coming out of the ESOL background and communities have successfully competed and been accepted at Baltimore City College, and others at Poly, etc. That doesn't sound like a lot of young people, but one of the issues is that there is a question at the end of this. That one of the issues is, gee whiz, if I'm coming from an immigrant family, I'm smart, I've made it into a Mervo, and now I'm going there. I know, and I appreciate your loyalty to Mervo. All of a sudden, you might feel you're all by yourself someplace far away from home. You really need to build a cadre, a group, a sort of a pioneer delegation to go forth and into the cities and Polys and Mervos and Dunbars and all the wonderful places that we have where you have to sort of compete to get in. And they did so all right, so that happened. And everybody's very excited. Thank you. Thank you. Your people have worked with.
The chief of staff was.
Yes, I know. She sat at every meeting, and we drove her crazy. And
No, you didn't. It was such a pleasure to sit with those young
well, no,
people.
you did. You did always express how important it was. So that's a success. And so now, and I did send this email to you when I received it this afternoon. Basically, what the Somos young people now are saying is, wow, and they had a welcoming thing, they had a welcoming, special welcoming for those 55 people, and more than half of them came. And now they're going to find the rest, and they need some names so they can do that. That's one thing. And the other thing is that this group of young people who's made this happen, and it's fair competition, it's been worked out so that nobody's getting a break. Everybody's competing fairly with everybody else in the world, and winning and winning and winning. They want to get back with they want to get with those MIT people who are developing models for this to compare their own model with it, and do that soon. And they're worried about the 8th graders already. Not these 8th graders, next year's 8th graders. So they want to improve upon the model that helped them fairly, along with the school system, develop fair standards for competition that, of course, led to a wonderful cadre of students coming into our citywide schools. Yeah. So thank you. Will you do it? Will you help them? Will you please?
Yes, and they are worried. They do still have questions about this year's 8th graders, as do we. So there are 8th graders who are current English language learners who had zeros on some sections of their composite score. And so we had said, and we are doing this, that we would go back and we would use alternative tests that we could use to fill in any blanks that they have. So that's in progress now.
Oh, I see. Maybe that's the 8th graders they were talking about.
So those are the 8th graders we're talking about. So that is, we are doing that. And then in terms of working with the MIT professor, just so other people understand, we are doing a process to look at our selection process, our choice process for schools, and had been working with a professor from MIT. And so when these incredibly bright students came to us with these ideas, and really not just like, not with just a general, you should do something kind of a proposal. It was we have researched it. This is the challenge. This is the needs you're not meeting, and these are our specific ideas about how you could meet these needs. So when they did that, we were really appreciative and offered that they could then meet with this MIT professor to run some of their models, because they had a specific change that they were proposing to the composite score. So we are working on setting that up, and we will absolutely do that, because I think it's a great learning opportunity for students to do the same work that we do. Is, we have ideas and we think, oh, this would work, and then we run it through a model and we try it, and sometimes it doesn't work. Sometimes it does, or sometimes you have to tweak it, and so they should be part of that process.
So basically, wow. And so much of it has come from the diligence and unwavering dedication of a bunch of our high school students. And now they're going to sit down with MIT and teach them a few things and maybe learn a couple in the process. So thank you very much. And that's our school system. Those are our kids. And so wake up, Maryland, and give us a break and give us our fair share. And I appreciate directing the anger where it belongs, not anger, but the attention where it belongs. And I think that if we can, any way that we can help that makes sense. Sometimes politicians go down to Annapolis to testify, and it's the worst thing they could have done for the cause they support. But you know, guided help we would like to accept. And one other thing I would like to say in all this student funding and charters and all, there are so many of our students, same theme, who, as you well know, they don't sign in for anything because...
Is this another question? Or?
Oh, that's right.
Yeah.
So
because,
I'll catch on the next go-round if I'm able
we
to
might be better off going to 2 questions. But Councilman Dorsey.
Thank you.
Hi.
Hi.
I want to ask just a couple of really quick, like one sentence and questions, one sentence answers, because I got a point that I got to make here that's really important. How many schools, just, I don't need more than a number, how many schools are going to have new point of entry or point of use lead filtration systems for drinking water this year?
So what I can do is, Dr. Washington, do you know that? Yeah, I don't have that number.
I mean,
The 21st century schools will all have new pipes, and so
Okay,
the
that's
schools
not
that open
many
in
out
the
of the
fall, they
system.
will. We are.
do you not have the money to do it on all of them?
Oh, no.
There's a pilot in 2 schools?
Yeah, the pilot in 2 schools.
That's it.
Colleagues, we need $3.78 million to make the water drinkable in our schools. This is going to pay off better than the bottled water that our schools are paying for. It's going to cost less per year. It's going to cost less over time than the bottled water that these schools are buying right now. And this is real personal for me. I drank this water. I graduated from the School for the Arts in 2000. We knew that there was lead in the water in the 90s. And the next time I came back to my school, there was a sign on the fountains that said, "Don't drink the water." I don't want to hear another thing about enrollment in these schools until anytime somebody walks into that building, any building, they don't have to look at a sign that says, "Don't drink the water." We need to come up with $3.78 million out of this billions of dollars that we have here on the table and make this water potable, God damn it. That's all I'm saying.
Councilman Burnett.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Dr. Sanalisis, for joining us today and for all that you do. Been a great partner for us. Had a couple questions about, in your slideshow there was information shared about preventative maintenance being up something like 60% or so.
Mm-hmm.
Sorry, I lost my page.
No. I'm trying to get back to it too.
There we go.
Was it?
Yeah, I mean, there was an additional $3 million put in. So what does that get us as far as the issues associated with the HVAC systems, heating and cooling? How many additional schools is that? How much of a dent in the problem? That's all one question, sir. Does this put us in? You get where I'm going.
It's just a pithy one. So I'm going to ask Dr. Washington to speak on that one, to give me a little bit of a break, and also because she can speak in far more depth, because this was actually her proposal.
Good evening. So in terms of the additional $3 million, so what it is a balance between both adding additional capacity to the team and then also addressing the preventative maintenance schedule for our schools. So what our budget that exists right now, we're able to touch each one of our schools. We have about 160 schools in our portfolio. We're able to go in and do filter changes, some of those different things in each one of our schools. As our budget increases every year with the additional $3 million, we're able to do a little bit more. So we're able to do 2 or 3 cycles of our schools. If we do it in terms of what industry standards, they would say we'd need to touch the schools 4 times. So that $3 million is a balance of increasing our preventative maintenance related to our HVAC, but also related to other systems, fire safety, a number of different things, and then also increasing capacity, because one of the challenges that we have is not just the preventative maintenance that needs to happen with our school, but actually having additional FTE that's supervising the amount of square footage that we have. So we have about 17 million square feet across all of our schools, and our staff per FTE needs to increase so we can better address our systems.
Okay. So I guess in the coming fiscal year, is there a number of schools?
All of our schools. So when we talk about preventative maintenance, that's
well, I
touching
mean, like, so
all
how
of our
many
schools.
had HVAC issues? How many will now in this fiscal year?
So we had about, there were about 80 of our schools that had HVAC issues in January. Predicting how many that we'll have this year, we have old systems, and so it's kind of difficult to predict what's going to happen this coming year. But having additional staff capacity, doing additional preventative maintenance, that will have an impact on us not having to have continual issues with our facilities. But again, we have old facilities. Until we have new systems with our capital improvement plan.
So that's separate.
Exactly.
Okay. And how many, I did see, actually that's in here, I'm not even gonna ask, because there's a number associated with the HVAC repairs in the CIP request. That's in this
Right, and those are
presentation.
individual projects.
Yeah, okay. That's my one question. Okay.
Councilwoman Middleton.
Getting down to the wire. First of all, thank you, Dr. Sandelises, and your whole team and your board chair and the board members for the continual service and work that you do in the school system. And so I'm going to take another spin on safety, since you mentioned safety, but this is safety, I guess, outside of the school when students leave, and particularly the high schools. We know that we have crossing guards that we're trying to get, in the elementary and middle schools, but in the previous hearings that we had with, I think it was Department of Transportation, the Parking Authority, I was able to bring up a pilot program that was starting. I refreshed the Department of Transportation's memory and gave them the contact person, because they were putting together a high school pilot program for students that they were going to use Poly Western because of the design of that campus, and the area all around that school, and then 83, and how they've been fighting for a bridge and all that, all the details with that. But this is I want you to, I guess it would be facilities. Are they with safety? So it's Department of Transportation that is leading the charge with this, and we had, there was a few meetings, but it dropped away, and I'm trying to I think it's important to bring it back, especially because of a student was hit at Poly last year. So, and I know when children leave high schools now, too, when they get out, they have the technology, they're looking at their cell phones, they're just so distracted, so they're trying to bring back that awareness, and they have a manual that they were developing. So I think it should be kind of the charge also for the school system to have that partnership come back together. I know the last meeting was at the Department of Transportation, but we did have some on campus. I know Councilwoman Clark was involved some way, and also Councilman Pinkett. But I think it's very important if this gets developed again so it can be used in the high schools. And I think they wanted to, it was an awareness kind of program, and they wanted to include the high school students, just teaching them, you know, we have walkers, we have students that ride bikes. I included the parking authority because they are really the ones that help to place bike racks and things, and we're now in the age of, you know, our bike lanes on our streets, so it's important to get this pilot program booted up again so it can be used. So I just wanted to kind of throw that out there because safety is very important for our children when they, you know, go to school and leave, and we're still accountable and responsible for high school students. And just to end that, it just dawned on me that we've been losing state funding for the last 4 years.
State funding for?
Just overall, has the funding been dropping the last 4 years?
Yeah,
Because
I mean,
that
yes,
was
but based on enrollment.
based on
enrollment.
Enrollment, because of the enrollment.
And wealth. And wealth.
That's why the funding has been dropping, okay. Okay, that's a good point to remember as well, so we can continue working with you with that advocacy, because you're going to need all the advocacy that you can, and you do seem to be focusing this on help at the state level. Thank you.
No, thank
Councilman
you.
Stokes.
Madam CEO, and my colleague, Councilman Pinkett, mentioned also, charter schools to me are just like city schools. Them parents and them teachers work just as hard as the city school parents, and some of the charter schools are doing exceptionally well, better than some of the city schools. My question is, did your office conduct a review of the charter schools, and were the charter schools consulted? And if you conducted, if your office conducted a review, do you have a copy of the review with the charter schools?
So let me just make sure, Councilman Stokes, that I understand the question. Are you asking for a performance review, like charter renewal? Are you asking about a financial review?
Maybe the performance review and
So we do
the financial too, probably, because
right. So the renewal process does have a component that deals with the overall management, which includes fiscal management of a charter school. But depending on what the renewal time frame is, some charter schools might, you know, be undergoing a review every 5 years, some every 3 years. So it varies by charter school where or when that review would have taken place.
well, is there any way we can get a copy of the ones that you did for the last 3 years?
I think they're public. I think we've posted them. Don't we post the? I understand. So the councilman charter reviews, don't we post those?
Charter renewals are posted, yeah.
They're posted.
Can we still, the committee, get a copy of that also? And
We can send you the link if
and
you'd
were
like,
the charter
if they're
schools
posted.
consulted
I'm sorry?
about the review? Was the charter schools?
Oh,
consulted?
absolutely. Our review is incredibly thorough, and it includes their board. It includes members of their school community. It's actually a very thorough process.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Dr. Santelises, thank you for indulging our questions. I'm going to go back through one more time.
Sure.
And what I ask my colleagues, ask your question. This is not the commentary portion of the hearing. If you choose commentary, then I will exercise my authority as the chair to determine that you do not have a question to ask. So, Councilman Scott, do you have a second question?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and Madam, thank you again. Actually, I do have a second question. Can you tell me how the district identifies successful innovation in charters, and how do we incorporate them into the system-wide curriculum?
In terms of the system-wide curriculum? Right, but it's curriculum specifically.
Yeah, how, the innovations that are in the charters, how we.
Okay. So one of the things that I would say is that is an area that I think is not as deliberate or robust as it could be. So I'll just start out by saying that. I think what we have is partnerships with particular charters or particular charter operators who. So for example, City Springs this evening, right? That's a charter school as part of a charter network, but that particular charter operator, Baltimore Curriculum Project, has been willing to partner with us around the expansion of restorative practices, because that's a group of schools that's been doing restorative practices for a long time. They were there tonight. We have, for example, Baltimore International Academy, and they partnered with us because, and frankly did a wonderful job with demonstrated results on what late middle grades immersion looks like. And they did that as part of our kind of requesting and talking with them about, what does late language immersion look like. I think that there are many other examples of that. There are other charter schools that hold conferences. I know City Neighbors holds a conference every year that cuts across the city and invites traditional schools, independent schools, and public schools, both traditional and charter. So we have instances, but admittedly, where we're lacking, and this goes to, I think, something that that partners with what the board chair said, is that part of why we just want to have an explicit conversation around funding is because we spend so much time talking about funding that actually developing the systems to have more systematic innovation have been ignored. And I would also say that we have traditional schools that also have innovation that frankly charters could learn from as well. I think one of the misnomers is that the only innovative, high-performing schools in the city are charters. So really, we need more cross-pollination, and we haven't done as good a job as we could on that. I think that's one of the areas we need to focus.
Councilman Slifer.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Councilman Henry. Councilman Cohen.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Dr. Sanalise's shared passion of my colleague and I over here is student transportation. I know we've talked before, and you all have been doing a lot of work on improving commute times for kids. We know that, I talk to kids at Patterson who live in the western part of the city, and, it'll take them hour and a half, 2 hours. The data as well as I do that anything above, I believe, 50 minutes, you start to lose academic achievement. There's higher rates of truancy, so on and so forth. It is another one of those issues that unless you're a kid in Baltimore or a teacher, you just don't know how damaging it is, especially when a lot of our kids will also report that MTA buses will leave them behind, will keep moving while they're trying to get on the bus. We had a big issue last year with them cutting bus pass hours and then a big scrap to get them back. Was wondering if you could give an update on where you all are on that work, on improving commute times. And then also, I asked this of the Department of Transit, did they work with you all? Does DOT, Baltimore City DOT, work with you in that task force to try and improve commutes for our kids? I know largely to do with MTA, but is DOT also at the table?
To be honest, I am not on that work group, so I would have to check to be able to verify specifically. I think so, just based on other conversations that we have with DOT. Do you want to come and speak a little bit about that? I will say this, as Dr. Washington comes, again, she's been a wonderful acting chief operating officer, because this is not what she's been doing for the last 2 years. But I will say this, that internal to the system, we're doing our own analyses. We've actually been working with the state with our own routing to make sure that on our yellow buses we are being more efficient as possible with the timing, with the timing of commutes. And it's actually something that we have to report to the state on, particularly with our students with disabilities. I think to your point about student transportation, being connected to a larger public transportation issue. And again, Dr. Washington can say what committee we're on and who we're working with. I think fundamentally, this is a city, having lived in urban areas at least 30 of my 50 years on the earth, I can honestly say I have never experienced the challenge as an adult on public transit that I have in the city of Baltimore. Yeah. And it is, and we had this discussion with our grassroots community partners last night. And we had a real forthright discussion about the role of transportation. So I will turn over to Dr. Washington, but just to say, if there are suggestions of other things and other ways and folks we can be partnering with, more than happy to do that, and we do. But it is it's a quality issue, and I know the Department of Transportation here in the city has their hands full. I just, and I don't want to be overly simplistic, but I still say that there's something wrong when I can get a bus more reliably in rural Mississippi than I can for kids who are standing in the rain in a city the size of Baltimore. Like that just in and of itself is highly problematic. But I will let Dr. Washington address. Do you know who's on the committee?
So I think that
Sorry, into the mic, please.
I'm sorry. So if you were referencing, there was a study that was done initially. It was with the Department of Transportation. They also included some of our folks, and also a research organization called the Burke organization. And so there was a study and analysis that was done looking at our children's experience on the bus, on the MTA bus. It looked at some of the time on the bus too, and I think that they ran some routing analysis using geographic information systems. And so we did have an opportunity to review the study and provide comment and feedback on the study. But again, as Dr. Santalisa said, transportation is really not my area of focus.
We can get you the more specifics. And the other piece, so we'll get more specifics. One of the things I do know is that John Land has regular communications, both with, who's also in operations, with our local Department of Transportation as well as the MTA. But we're more than happy. I just don't want to speak and say we are representative and somebody is on there when I don't know, but we're more than happy to circle back.
Yeah, just underlying the question is, would it not at some point be economically better to just buy, I know we have buses for kids that have special needs, and we buy the taxis for the homeless children. I do just wonder, given that MTA has shown, in my opinion, nothing but contempt for our kids, whether at some point it would just be better to take the hit and buy a fleet.
Well, and I will say that is a question that we asked even during this current budget cycle. It's not the time to go out and buy a whole fleet of buses for obvious reasons.
Sure.
But we continue to, Commissioner Kashani.
I'm obviously not the person to totally answer the question, but it was one of the first questions I asked when I joined the board and looked at these numbers. And it's, I tried to do the math. I said, well, how much does a bus cost? And it's not actually that simple. I mean, the cost of owning a bus is, there's all these extra, insurance and this and this and this and this. And there's a shortage of drivers. There's like a whole other layer
That's right.
to this problem.
That's right.
Can I just add one other thing, is that right now we also have a working group that we're with a lot of different partners looking at transportation and ways that we could be more efficient. So we just had a meeting this morning, and it's a great group of folks. We've got the head of transportation from 2 neighboring counties. We've got somebody from the state on it. We've got somebody from Burke on it. We've got somebody from private industry. We've got a parent from the head of CCAC that advocate for disabled students. We've got principals of 2 schools that have a highly specialized population, students with highly specialized needs. We've got somebody from, I'm trying to think of the other representatives, but it's a wide range of folks, and really going through the various challenges we have, and it's it's helpful to have other people thinking through and helping us really go through and really look at the challenges and try to help us come up with solutions.
The right question.
Councilman Burnett.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Second question was around the selection process for your intensive
Learning sites?
Sorry.
Sure.
See, the problem is that I can't read my own handwriting sometimes. Working on that. I saw that there was sort of, I think, 50 schools or so in the first year. Can you just talk a little bit about how those schools were selected? What's the prioritization process? Could you just expound on that a little bit? I found it interesting and wanted to know a little more about that.
Chief of Staff.
So we wanted to make sure that in selecting schools that we were really achieving a few things. One is we wanted to have a good representation around the city, and we wanted to make sure that we had schools who were really committed to doing this work. This is hard. The intensive sites, we're asking a lot of those schools, so we needed schools who were really committed. So instead of us picking schools, the way we selected schools was we had them apply. So we asked schools to talk to their staff and to identify if they wanted to apply for one of the areas. We required them to get 80% of their staff to vote in favor of applying. And then we also tried to pick some distribution around the city. So we did allow principal supervisors to each select one of the schools that had applied within their area as one that they would kind of propose moving forward, and then we did interviews for the other slots, and we also throughout that tried to keep in mind not just geographic distribution, but we also wanted a range of different grade configurations. We wanted a range of different levels of experience of principals. We wanted a range of different types of students served. So like some of our secondary schools, we have schools that are serving some challenging populations because we want for literacy we want to be able to learn how do we accelerate learners who are behind. So we tried to make sure we got a broad range of different schools.
And just as a 1B, are the schools published as to which ones have already been selected? Is it on your website or anything like that?
It's the last slide.
Okay.
Sorry.
It wasn't a priority slide earlier, so I missed that one.
Let's see.
I think there was 3 columns.
Oh my goodness. No wonder you guys wanted me to speed it up.
Oh,
there you go. They're right
Okay.
there.
Are you looking for a particular school?
Yeah, but okay. We can talk offline. Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you.
No, thank you.
So thank you again, Dr. Santelises, Chairwoman Kasani, and the entire team. Clearly, you all have the most important agency in this city, and one day we'll realize it, and our budget will reflect that. So, but thank you again for the presentation this evening. Thank you for enduring all of our questions. Just thank you. This committee. Well,
just very quickly.
Yeah.
Do we know how much we spend in the bottled water every year?
In which area?
In the bottled water. If you don't know now, you can just email me later. Yeah, I'll just follow up.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay.
This committee is now in recess till tomorrow at 9 a.m. when we'll have the health department. Thank you again.
Thank you all.